Hello everybody, welcome to another video. In this video, I basically want to talk about scope. Scope is basically the idea of scope is the idea of where a program starts and ends. And so basically the idea is that whenever you created variables, we never actually talked about where they should be declared and where they should not be declared. So for example, let's say I had a variable called string name in the main method and I called it mo again. And let me go ahead and delete this. So let's actually compile. Let's say I did system.out.println and I printed out name. So basically, once I compile this, let's compile it. Here it's saying cannot find the variable name. Well, that's weird because I declared it here. And this is the idea of where scope comes into play. So I remember how I kept like writing the variables inside the method. So the idea was that we would assume that the variable will always be defined whenever we use it, but we never actually talked about the limits of where variables can be defined and where they cannot be defined. So the idea is wherever the curly brace are contained. So for example, in the main method, the curly brace is here and the ending curly brace is here. The variable that's being used and whatever variable name that thing has to be used in the main method. So in this case, if I want to use the variable name, I actually have to be inside the main method. Or another way we could have fixed this is we could have a parameter. Parameter basically allows us to pass information from one place to another, which I talked about. So if I actually did this, if I actually print this out, string name, and I actually print this out, string name, and I actually ran it. See how this actually compiles now? Because now the variable is inside this scope right here. So the scope is basically defined by the opening curly brace and the closing curly brace. If you guys are really confused on what I mean, for example, I can't just use a variable name in a method. Let's say I declared a variable of x in one method and I try to use it in another method. It will not work. Like, let me show you an example. Let's say I had public static void. I called it uh, temp. And then I declared a variable called int x equals 4. Um, and let's say I had another method. I called it temp2. And I tried to print out x. Well, some of you guys are saying this will work because x is declared here. If I could actually fix my curly braces and actually, let me go ahead and compile this. See how it's saying, let me add a line number so we could actually see what line this is complaining about. Let me compile it. See how it's saying on line 17 right here, we are using a variable called x and it's not declared. Well, that's obvious. That's silly because I declared it here. And this is the idea of where scope comes into play. The variable x is only defined in this method only. So if I actually want to use that value somewhere else, the way that we talked about so far, there are many other ways in which we could fix it, which will come later on in the course. There are different other ways to fix it. But one common way to fix it is I could actually pass it through a parameter. I could actually say here, I could actually pass it into x through here. And now basically when I call this method, it will work. Same thing with the main method. The string variable mo is only available inside the main method. So if I actually want to use the string name of mo somewhere else, I actually have to pass it through a parameter so that way I could use it. If I don't have a parameter defined and I actually want to use the variable called name from main in a different method, this will not work because it's only defined in that scope. So again, I think some of you guys are like really confused, and I apologize. I'll just go ahead and delete all this and show you something really simple. Let's say I had a variable called int y equals 56. And let's say I had a method public static void and I said print y. And let's say I did system.out.println and I just printed out y. Let's see. Oops. What in the world happened here? Let's compile it. See what happens when I try to compile it? What does it say? The variable y it says cannot find symbol here. Look where it's pointing at. Again, we talked about the idea that if you actually want to use a variable, it actually has to be defined. And the issue here is the variable y is defined, but where is it defined? It's defined in the main method. So the only place where y could be used is the main method. I could fix it by here. I could say int y equals 67. I could declare it here. Again, this will take care of the problem. But let's, oops. I need to actually call the method here. So print y, actually, I need to actually call it. So see how I printed out 67? One way you could fix it is you could declare the variable inside the scope that it's being used. And how is the scope defined? It's defined by the curly brace that's contained inside of it, the curly brace here. So here and the scope inside the main is the opening curly brace to the closing curly brace and whatever code is contained inside there. But let's say this is not how I want to fix it. Let's say I actually want one value of y and I want to use it throughout. This is where a parameter comes into play. So how I could fix it is I can define y to be a parameter. And so that way when I actually call it, I can actually give it a value of 56. So that way I can pass in 56. I could change this number, 567. See how I could change one line and I could just make it my life easier instead of having to declare it multiple times. Instead of saying int y equals 56, another time int y equals 37. So that's basically the idea of how scope works. Scope is only defined by the variable that's contained inside the curly brace of a method. And if you actually want to use a variable that was declared somewhere else, like in a different method, you could actually pass in a parameter and then actually call it with that value. And so that's basically an introduction to scope. Again, I apologize if you guys are confused on this. I'll definitely try to make more videos on this. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in another video.